My name is Fatima Hassan. I am the founder and director of the Health Justice Initiative based in Cape Town, South Africa. I live on a continent where the death rate from COVID is rising. By early August 2021, less than 3% of people across the continent were vaccinated. I live in a country with a drip feed of vaccine supplies that has now only reached 8 million people. So let's put this into context. While 64% of the population of the United Kingdom is now fully vaccinated, in Uganda, the figure is only 1.4%. The 50 least wealthy nations in the world, home to about 20% of the global population, have received less than 3% of all vaccine doses. Sadly, many parts of Latin America and Asia are experiencing similar vaccine inequities, which the Director General of the World Health Organization has called morally grotesque. In some parts of the world, CEOs are even calling for booster shots, while many Black and brown people in the global South have not even received a first shot of what we call a people's vaccine. That is a vaccine that has been publicly funded and researched by public scientists that is considered safe and effective. Yet pharmaceutical companies' profits are on the rise. And this is what we call vaccine nationalism, where richer nations and pharmaceutical companies allowed a system where a handful of countries could buy up all the supplies, refusing to help others in the global South to manufacture enough vaccines to vaccinate all of our people, or even 40% of the world's population by end 2021. At the same time, pharmaceutical companies are raking in huge profits amounting to billions of dollars. For example, Pfizer. In the first 3 months of 2021, Pfizer's vaccine brought in $3.5 billion in revenue, around a quarter of the company's total first quarter revenue. And the company now forecasts $33.5 billion in vaccine sales. Against a backdrop of vaccine inequity on the deadly scale that we are witnessing, it is clear that the market, like before, has actually let us down. So how did we get here? Well, we've socialized the risk of funding and vaccine research. We've identified the vaccine manufacturers. We've set up publicly funded vaccine injury compensation schemes. But rich nations in particular permitted these companies to hoard the vaccine knowledge through excessive protections of intellectual property claims in a deadly policy choice. It relied on pharmaceutical companies' cooperation and volunteerism, which has not materialized. And by doing so, it allowed them to exercise market monopolies. For months now, the proposal to waive these intellectual property protections and rules for this particular pandemic for a short period of time to access life-saving technologies to reach everyone everywhere has been stalled deliberately for profit motives and geopolitical considerations. So look at the nations blocking the TRIPS waiver and look where those companies have their head offices. It's not a coincidence. Monopolies on knowledge and supply chains mean that only a certain number of vaccines can be made in a year and accordingly distributed. This is why COVAX, for example, cannot even meet its modest targets for 2021. There are simply not enough supplies. And intellectual property protection means that governments are not forcing companies to share their technology and license others to make life-saving vaccines in the middle of a pandemic. As a result, Africa, Latin America, Asia are waiting and waiting for drip feeds of supplies, slowing down entire vaccination programs, putting global immunity at risk with increasing death and illness every day. And it's making the concept and the notion of immunological equity even harder to achieve and to reach, let alone global population immunity. We have variants that are circulating faster now across borders, yet vaccines are still not available to those who are most at risk: healthcare workers, people over 60, and people with comorbidities. There is no vaccine equity, even though vaccines relied on public knowledge, public scientists, and public funding, as well as public participation in clinical trials. So this situation must change. But to change this, we have to take on the intellectual property stranglehold on the world. We have commodified vaccines. Instead of treating it as a public good, we have commodified all COVID-19 related technologies instead of treating them as a public good in the middle of a devastating pandemic. It's an absurd and self-defeating public health strategy. So hoarding knowledge and hoarding supplies is egregious. There's hardly any voluntary cooperation and sharing of technology on the part of companies who've engaged in a lot of PR over the last year, but hardly engage in any genuine knowledge sharing, despite the promises of solidarity at the beginning of this pandemic. For example, in May 2020 already, the World Health Organization launched what's called CTAP, the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool. And it called on vaccine developers to share their IP know-how through pooling and voluntary licensing arrangements. No one has, not a single company has. And then this year, by June 2021, the WHO set up the first COVID-19 mRNA vaccine hub in Africa, actually in my home country, South Africa, and in my hometown, Cape Town. But to date, not a single vaccine company has entered the hub. What vaccine companies and rich nations have basically said to millions and millions of people in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, who are mostly Black and brown people, who are mostly former colonial subjects, is that our lives don't matter. Like with HIV/AIDS, we are last in line for access to a life-saving technology that could be the difference between how long we actually have to be involved in and deal with this pandemic. Thank you.